The afternoon sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of my mother's living room, casting delicate patterns on the carpet. It should have been a calm, ordinary Sunday, but the moment my mother spoke, a quiet storm began to brew inside me. "Did I tell you," she said casually, sipping her tea, "your sister bought a beautiful home, gorgeous place really. I went to see it last week." I froze mid-bite, my fork hovering above the untouched piece of cake. My sister, a home, beautiful. My chest tightened, a mix of pride for her and a sharp sting of something else, something I tried not to name. Envy, resentment, I couldn't tell. "Oh, that's nice." I managed, forcing a smile. My mother's eyes sparkled, unaware of the flicker of discomfort in mine. She didn't notice how my fingers clenched around the edge of the plate, or how my mind began calculating, comparing, measuring. "You should come by sometime," she said, leaning back on the couch. "I think you'd really like it. It's in a lovely neighborhood, and the interior, well, it's simply perfect." I nodded, though the smile felt brittle. I knew my sister's taste was impeccable. Everything she did seemed effortless, polished, flawless. I loved her, but sometimes it felt like she existed in a world just out of my reach. Every achievement of hers shone like a spotlight, and every time our paths crossed in conversation, I felt small. That evening, I retreated to my apartment, replaying the conversation in my mind. I scrolled through images of my sister's new home on social media, the open-plan kitchen, the sun-drenched living room, the balcony overlooking a serene park. Each photo was like a subtle dagger, reminding me of how far behind I sometimes felt. And yet, as I stared at the screen, a spark ignited. Why should her success define my sense of self-worth? Why should a house, no matter how beautiful, dictate my feelings? I pushed myself away from the computer and walked to the window, staring at the city skyline. The lights glimmered like possibilities, teasing and taunting in equal measure. I thought about my own life, my own dreams, things I had pushed aside, waiting for the right time, or for someone's approval. The sting of my mother's praise for my sister didn't have to be a wound. It could be a fuel, a reason to rise, to claim something spectacular of my own. A quiet determination settled over me, hardening like concrete. I wouldn't sit in the shadows while my sister's achievements were paraded as if they were the only measure of success. I would do something remarkable, not out of spite, exactly, but out of the need to prove to myself that I mattered too. As night fell, I sat at my desk, drafting plans in my mind. I didn't know exactly how I'd surpass this latest milestone, but the desire was there, raw and insistent. Every detail of my future success began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. The apartment, the neighborhood, the reveal. Each thought was a promise, a whispered vow that one day I wouldn't just compete, I would triumph. And as I finally lay down to sleep, I understood something profound. This wasn't just about a home. It was about recognition, about being seen, about finally stepping out of the shadow that had always seemed to follow me. The fire had been lit, and there was no extinguishing it now. The morning light felt different now. Sharp, purposeful, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. The previous evening's resolve had settled into something more concrete, a plan, a direction. I couldn't undo the sting of my mother's casual praise for my sister, but I could channel it. I could transform it into action, into something tangible that would leave no room for doubt. I began researching the housing market, poring over listings, browsing luxury condos with glossy photos that made my heart race. High ceilings, sleek kitchens, floor-to-ceiling windows with panoramic city views, the kind of homes that belonged in magazines, the kind that commanded attention. Each image was a promise, a glimpse into a future I refused to be denied. I drew up budgets, calculated potential mortgages, and imagined how I would present my own achievement to my family. This wasn't about revenge in the cruel sense. It was about claiming my own space in the world, proving that I could rise on my own terms. Still, the thought of the look on my sister's face when she realized I had surpassed her stirred a sweet, undeniable thrill. There were obstacles, of course. My finances weren't limitless, and I had bills, savings goals, and the lingering weight of self-doubt. Late nights found me crunching numbers, negotiating with real estate agents, weighing every tiny detail. But with each passing day, the vision became sharper. I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't a fleeting desire. This was a turning point. Friends and colleagues began to notice a change in me. I carried myself differently, moved with purpose, and spoke with a quiet confidence I hadn't possessed before. Conversations with my mother and sister became more tolerable because I no longer allowed their words to weigh me down. Instead, I smiled politely, keeping my ambitions close to my chest. Evenings were spent in careful planning. I visited condos discreetly, walking through empty hallways, imagining furniture and laughter, picturing the moment I would finally reveal my triumph. The excitement was intoxicating, almost like a private celebration every time I signed a document, made a deposit, or visualized the final key exchange. I also discovered a side of myself I hadn't fully known. Ambition, focus, and patience were not traits I associated with who I had been, but they were becoming integral to who I was becoming. Every setback, every small rejection from agents or bureaucratic hurdles only strengthened my resolve. I was learning to navigate the world on my own terms with strategy and precision, and yet, despite the strategic mindset, the emotional undercurrent never left me. I imagined the moment my mother and sister would see my new home for the first time, their faces frozen in disbelief, the subtle shifts in their expressions as they realized this was no small achievement. That vision sustained me, but it wasn't vanity alone that drove me. It was the hunger for recognition, for acknowledgement, for the quiet validation that I had always yearned for. By the time the paperwork was nearly complete, I felt a curious mixture of fear and exhilaration. Fear that it might not live up to the dream, that somehow my carefully laid plans would falter. Exhilaration that finally, I was stepping into a version of my life I had only dared to imagine. Late one night, alone in my apartment, I raised a glass to myself. Not in triumph yet, not fully, but in recognition of the courage it took to dream bigger, to fight for my place, and to refuse to remain in the shadow of someone else's success. I was building more than a home. I was building my own proof that I could rise, that I could shine, and that when the moment came, I would do so in a way that could not be ignored. The day had finally arrived. Months of planning, saving, and strategizing had led to this moment, and my heart beat with a combination of nervousness and exhilaration. The $920K condo wasn't just a place to live. It was a statement, a testament to my determination and resilience. I had imagined this day countless times, rehearsed the smile, and envisioned the precise moment my family would see what I had achieved. I arrived at my condo early, letting the morning sun flood through the expansive windows. The city stretched below me, a glittering canvas that seemed to nod in approval. I walked through each room, placing small touches of decor, making everything picture perfect. The polished floors gleamed, the marble countertops sparkled, and the balcony offered a view that was nothing short of breathtaking. Every detail whispered success. When my mother and sister arrived, I greeted them with a calm smile, keeping my excitement contained. "Welcome," I said, opening the door with a flourish I had imagined 1,000 times. "I wanted you to see something." Their eyes widened immediately. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, a mixture of shock and surprise washing over her face. My sister's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment neither spoke. They stepped inside hesitantly, as if unsure whether to admire or question the reality before them. This is incredible," my mother finally managed, her voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. She wandered toward the living room, touching the sleek surfaces and marveling at the view. I didn't expect," I smiled, feeling a warm, quiet satisfaction. "I wanted something special," I said softly. "I thought it was time I had a space of my own, a place that reflects me, my work, and my life." My sister, usually quick with compliments and jokes, was silent. She circled the condo, examining every corner, the subtle luxury, the sense of thoughtful design. I could see the calculations running through her mind: price, prestige, comparison. Her eyes flicked to me briefly, and I met her gaze with calm confidence. There was no gloating, no cruelty, just the undeniable presence of my achievement. I mean, it's beautiful," she said finally, her tone carefully neutral. I knew her well enough to see the flicker of surprise mixed with a tinge of envy. My mother's expression softened, but the underlying shock remained. They were frozen, caught off guard by a success they hadn't anticipated, a level of accomplishment they hadn't expected from me. As they explored the condo, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just about the house. It was about claiming my own identity, proving to myself, and admittedly to them, that I could rise above comparisons and expectations. I didn't need their approval to validate my worth, but seeing their reaction, feeling that quiet, suspended shock, was undeniably satisfying. We spent the afternoon together, laughter returning slowly, conversations resuming with careful civility. Yet, beneath the polite chatter, a new dynamic had emerged. They now saw me differently, not just as their child or sibling, but as someone capable of extraordinary things, someone who would not be overlooked or underestimated. That night, after they left, I stood on the balcony, gazing at the city lights stretching endlessly below. A sense of quiet triumph washed over me, the fire that had begun months ago, the drive born of envy, ambition, and the desire for recognition, had transformed into something more profound. This condo wasn't just my victory, it was a symbol of self-respect, of perseverance, and of the subtle, sweet power of proving oneself without malice. And as the wind brushed against my face, carrying the distant hum of the city, I realized something essential. Revenge wasn't about hurting them, it was about stepping into my own light and refusing to let anyone's shadow define my worth. Tonight, I had done exactly that. The days following the reveal were quieter than I expected. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a new, subtler tension. My mother no longer gushed over my sister's achievements at every family dinner, and my sister seemed quieter, more measured in her words. I noticed the small glances, the pauses before she spoke, an acknowledgement, however silent, that the game had changed. It was strange, this shift in our dynamic. There were no arguments, no dramatic confrontations, just an unspoken understanding. I could feel the weight of their perception of me, a weight I had never fully experienced before. For so long, I had existed in the periphery, content to watch their lives unfold while comparing myself silently. Now, I was no longer peripheral. I had carved out a space where my presence demanded recognition. Yet even in this victory, there was a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. The thrill of triumph, the frozen expressions, the surprise, the unspoken admiration had been intoxicating. But I realized that true fulfillment wasn't in shocking them. It was in knowing, deep down, that I had earned this on my own, that I had relied on my own determination and strength. Their surprise had been sweet, yes, but it was only the icing on the cake. I spent evenings in the condo, walking through each room and marveling at what I had created. The balcony still offered the same breathtaking view, the living room gleamed under the soft lighting, and the kitchen smelled faintly of polished wood and new beginnings. Each corner of the condo was a reminder of my perseverance, of the countless late nights and strategic choices that had led to this moment. One afternoon, my sister called. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice hesitant. My heart skipped, wondering if this was jealousy, confrontation, or something else entirely. I invited her over. When she arrived, she was quieter than usual, but there was a softness in her eyes I hadn't expected. I wanted to say congratulations," she murmured, her voice careful but sincere. "This place, it's really amazing. You really did it." For the first time, I saw her not as a rival, but as someone who truly acknowledged my journey. We sat in the living room, talking not about comparisons or competitions, but about our lives, our ambitions, and the choices we had made. There was a sense of reconciliation, fragile but present. It wasn't about who had more, it was about recognition and respect. My mother joined us later, smiling more genuinely than she had in weeks. She didn't gush about my sister or me, but her eyes held warmth and pride. A quiet acknowledgement that we both had our places, our successes, and our worth. I realized then that the power of my revenge had always been secondary to the power of self-validation. Proving myself had been necessary, yes, but the deeper reward was knowing I could do it on my own terms. As night fell, I stood on the balcony once more, watching the city lights shimmer like a sea of possibility. The fire that had begun as envy had matured into something stronger, confidence, resilience, and a quiet sense of triumph that no one could take away. I understood, finally, that life's victories were sweetest when they were mine alone, earned through persistence and courage. The condo wasn't just a home, it was a monument to my journey, a symbol of the quiet, unrelenting strength that had carried me through self-doubt, comparison, and fear. And as I closed the door behind me and settled into the peace of the evening, I knew this. I had not just won the admiration of my family, I had won myself.